Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me tonight is Gabby Martin and Thomas Harper, and we're going to talk about the sin in Chapter 3 of The Mandalorian. Gabby and Thomas, how you both doing tonight?
I'm doing good.
I've been avoiding the sin of talking spoilers about this episode for 72 straight hours, so this is my time to dump it all out there, and I cannot wait.
I watched it at 4 a.m. Friday morning, and because I woke up like a kid eager Christmas morning, and it really reminded me of when I was a kid in the late 70s. So I was super young, but there were rare like Marvel cartoons. There was the Thing cartoon, which I know is like before you were both thought of. But I was 4, so that's okay too. And like I remember getting up super early in order to watch that because I wanted to. It's the same feeling with Mandalorian. And now kids who don't have Saturday morning cartoons know what it's like to get up super early to watch something like we did in the olden days. So I think that's one of the neat things about the weekly releases of The Mandalorian.
Who knew that? I mean, think back literally a year ago even, or certainly 5-10 years ago, that we would have, my Friday morning ritual is the exact same. I wake up at the crack of dawn and immediately run downstairs and turn this on to watch it. And if I told myself a year ago that would be the case, I'd slap myself and be like, "You're a liar from the future."
Gabby, do you have the same obsessive compulsive behavior that Thomas and I?
No, I don't. I was just thinking this because I saw on Twitter that a lot of people are the same, that, they just kind of run and go to watch it. I actually didn't watch it until Saturday night the first time.
What is this self-control?
I couldn't. I want to savor it. I want to just let it sit there and then watch it and absorb it. So.
Did you have a nervous tick or anything like that happening?
No, I just distracted myself with other things and then, sat down and watched it. And then, of course, now I've watched it like 5 times. So.
Okay, I'm like at 4 or 5. I lost count. I'm glad Deborah Chow got the Kenobi series after watching this masterpiece. So.
Yeah.
But we can get into the brilliant filmmaking after we talk about the law. So one issue that I identified, and Gabby, you've done some research on this as well, is the issue of the client hiring other bounty hunters with a kill order, so arguably to pay them less to go kill the child after the Mandalorian was retained. So a down payment had been made to the Mandalorian. So like they're engaged. There's an actual contract and he's in the middle of performance of it. Could you walk us through what kind of tortious interference with contract issues that can come from the client putting out more bounty hunters to go out and kill the kid, which would have a lower payout than the Mandalorian bringing the child in alive?
Well, I think the question is whether there is tortious interference. So tortious interference is obviously a private tort action, which involves a intentional interference with where someone else damages a contractual or business relationship with a third party that causes economic harm. So the question here would be whether there was a completed contract and whether there was a binding contract between the client and the Mandalorian, or whether what was really in place was an open offer, that the client had merely made multiple open offers, and that the only time the contract would become binding is when somebody came and finally performed on the contract. So when it's, I will give you X amount to bring back my dog. You can tell 5 people in the neighborhood, I will give you $100 if you find my dog. None of them, they're all going to go out and search for your dog. the person you're going to pay the $100 is the person who comes back with your dog, and none of the four other people can bring an action against you because all they had was an offer. There wasn't acceptance because there wasn't completed performance. So I don't know if there was much tortious interference, because you'd have to question what the intentional damage was done, which relationship was damaged or would be the subject of the suit. Was there economic harm? I mean, yeah, the other bounty hunters missed out on the money, but that's not, they didn't complete the performance, so therefore they're not necessarily harmed economically. So I think this is more in terms of a bid or, multiple offers or an open offer, that there's nothing really enforceable until somebody comes back with the package and the money is handed over. That's if, say the Mandalorian had come back with the child and, the client says, okay, now I'm not going to pay you, that would be a different story.
Well, that's a traditional breach, but I mean, like, let's flip this to the kissing cousin of tortious interference with prospective economic advantage, that the client gave Beskar to the Mandalorian as a down payment for his services. The Mandalorian goes out to perform those services, and that's when the Mandalorian runs into IG-11 that has a kill order on the child. And we find out that there, in episode 2, there are other bounty hunters who are actively trying to kill the child that the Mandalorian has to fight off. That's damage. I mean, like, he had the child in his custody. Other bounty hunters are trying to kill said child, and the Mandalorian has to fight them off in order to preserve his life, in addition to preserve the child's life. That sounds like, granted, it's extreme, and these contracts would be void on public policy grounds, but that's interference with a prospective economic advantage, because he's in the middle of performing, and these other contractors are running around trying to kill the child.
Don't hire IG-11 to try to find your dog if it becomes lost. I feel like that could go south very, very fast.
Yeah.
No matter how you specify the terms. That's where, Josh, you keyed in on, that's where I think the rub comes from the Mandalorian's perspective, because it's not that he collects the child and then it's over. He's won, he's fulfilled his contractual obligation, and these other bounty hunters go on to other jobs. It's that, whether by order of the client or just their own initiative, their own interpretation of these terms, they're going after him to try to snake the score right out from under him. And I think that's the problem. One thing I thought of was, if you turn the tables, and I don't want to jump too far ahead in the episode, but when the Mandalorian decides to come back for the child and retake him from the client, whether he's now committing the exact thing that he'd be arguing for, whether he's committing this sort of tortious interference.
Yeah, the contract's been performed, so I think it's a completely different issue, and that raises, I think what I think is probably the next issue with this is, when does bounty hunting become human trafficking? Because bounty hunting is about, like, bail bondsmen bringing in a fugitive. Well, the child's an infant. He's a 50-year-old infant, but it's not like an infant jumped bail. So, like, that's the problem right out of the gate, that this is full on, it's either murder for hire when it comes to just kill the kid, or it's human trafficking because the child did nothing other than be alive. So it's not like there's wrongful conduct, that the kid was out on bail and as an infant jumped bail and is still an infant as a bail escapee. That just seems, it's no longer in the realm of pure bounty hunting. It's now in the form of human trafficking, to give the child to the space Nazis so they can perform experiments upon him, which would arguably be the Joseph Mengele war crime quality experiment. And that's all bad from just like a public policy. Like there's no enforceable contract for human trafficking.
I'm just, for one, glad that this may be the Imperial remnant, but they're still just as good at real dastardly stuff. I mean, they've lost no step in their ability to commit atrocities. So that's good that they've retained that ability. Yeah, it's interesting because I think this was not something that I noticed initially, but it was pointed out that Dr. Pershing, the scientist that the client is working with, wears the uniform and the shoulder insignia of the Kaminoan cloners. We don't know where this is going. You overhear the client tell him, extract what you need. I can't guarantee your safety anymore. So presumably, when you look at the definition of human trafficking, we're talking just traditionally slavery of some type, services where you're not getting compensated. But I would argue that this impliedly falls into it, that trafficking a child so that you can harvest whatever it is, midichlorians, whatever they need from this baby Yoda, that's going to fall squarely within the definition there.
Gabby, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if, I was kind of stuck on the line between kidnapping, because obviously the Mandalorian is clearly taking away the child against his will. If he has a will, he doesn't have the capacity to object to his being taken.
Look, he's 50 years old. He's an adult.
Yeah, so he, and it was for some monetary gain that he took him against, or he seized him against his will. But if it rises to the level of trafficking, I would have to, to Thomas's point, see what they were doing, get more information as to what they plan to do with the child, and what the simple act of just seizing doesn't, to me, seem to rise to the level of human trafficking. There has to be some sort of extra step as far as, labor trafficking or sex trafficking or anything like that there's some work being done or something being done by the individual who's being kind of trafficked, who's being used in all sense as a tool, as a tool to get something, whether that's labor or whether that's the monetary gain from sex trafficking. There's a lot of involved in that. So I'm a little hesitant to put the label of trafficking on that, but that's somewhere between kidnapping and trafficking. Sure.
Yeah, I'm not. Looking at California Penal Code 236.1, one of the definitions is a person who deprives or violates the personal liberty of another with the intent to effect or maintain a violation, and a whole bunch of code sections is guilty of trafficking and shall be punished by imprisonment in state prison and all that good stuff. Medical experimentation deprives the child's personal liberty. And because the child's not consenting to that, and there's no parent or guardian consenting to that, they're doing experiments on a child. Mm-hmm. And like my read, and what I would argue, is that's the child's personal liberty, and it's being grossly violated for Dr. Pershing to extract whatever material they want from the child, and whether or not the child survives the process. I would call that human trafficking.
I think the twist that's coming is not that they're trying to get midichlorians or anything force related. He's trying to extract whatever gene made him that adorable in the first place and create a master race of just really cute Imperials that nobody wants to fight. They're just like, okay, well, you can take us over again. That's okay. We'll be ruled by you if you're that adorable.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking, he comes in, we don't know how this child got to Arvala 7 and got into that compound with all those ruffians. We do know that so the Mandalorian was not in on that first link of the chain, presumably the actual kidnapping. just because he comes in downstream doesn't mean that he's, if he meets the other elements, any less guilty. So, modern or real life child trafficking, the guy that's driving the boat that all the human slaves or children are on is no less guilty than the person that took them or tricked them into this position in the very first place. So all those links in the chain from start to finish would be equally criminally liable.
Yeah. It's also interesting when we actually get to the liberation that what exactly is Dr. Pershing? He's the only one that refers to the child as he, that,
And the child.
as the child.
Yeah.
Everyone else, the Mandalorian to the client refers to Baby Yoda as it, which, takes away humanity from, which makes it easier to perpetrate a crime, to not value the life of the child. And now, granted, the Mandalorian does, as part of the character arc, he does go from it to, referring to, the child as the child or the kid. And which again is, I think just part of the beautiful Star Wars arc that makes this Star Wars of, like the guy growing the conscience. And, up until the, the Grinch moment of the Mandalorian's heart grew 3 times that day. And he decides to...
He looks at the little ball and he's just like, "Oh, I have to go rescue him."
Yeah, and again, the visual storytelling of, like he's suiting up, firing everything up and just reaching for the handle and seeing that the ball is gone from the top of the handle. And just, it's such a powerful scene of he stops and we can't see his face. So it's all body language of like, nope, not doing this, powers down, and I'm going to go take on a whole bunch of armed stormtroopers and go save a kid.
Yeah.
That's everything Star Wars.
Yeah. If Pedro Pascal does not win an Emmy for this performance, there's something really wrong. He has a mask on, like a full-on mask, and yet we understand everything he's saying. So
he'll have won the Emmy for reading all of 1 page of dialogue in 8 episodes, and that'll set a new record.
It was like, nominating Tom Hanks for Castaway. It's like he had to act against a volleyball and a fake whale, like, and you felt it. It's daring the Academy not to nominate him. So again, same issue with the Mandalorian of everyone's going to cry over a puppet, and
even Werner Herzog cried over a puppet. So
a man who's never seen Star Wars before, apparently.
is obsessed with the puppet and treats it like a child. So.
Yeah. Like the fact that was it the Vanity Fair article that talked about him interacting with it on set like it was alive. It's I
just want video of that. I really do. I really want video of it.
It's like the fact he's playing the bad guy and it's like, yeah, I couldn't handle it. It's just, that's the power of that prop.
He's out there putting bounties in real life on anybody that's trying to take the puppet away from him.
Yeah. Just watching him speak is just such a delight. Well, that, brings us to the, what was one of the best protracted fight scenes in Star Wars lore of, the raid of the Imperial compound and then the shootout with the other bounty hunters. And, the analysis for both will be different, which is why I want to highlight, we have to handle it in 2 different segments. But damn, that was beautiful. The fights, plural, and just, nope, gonna go save the kid. But let's talk about the duty to rescue. So under, normal law, there's no duty to go out and help. Like if you see somebody drowning, you don't have to go swim out and save them. Not doing anything makes you a horrible person, but you're not legally liable for that. Now, if you start to swim out, or you get the person, you start towing them back and go like, God, this is, like I got a dental appointment, and you let go and swim back in. Yeah, then you're liable. So, in addition to being a bad human being, those in mind, there's no general duty to go out and rescue unless there's a special relationship. Gabby, you did a little research on this. Yeah, can you share some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I remember having to memorize these in torts first year. So again, we use the example, and you probably use it a lot, is this person drowning offshore. And so obviously anybody who's a parent has to go rescue that. And also the key asterisk to that is a parent or somebody acting in loco parentis. So babysitters, teachers, all have a duty to rescue. Common carriers, employers, invitees or persons on your property, spouses. But the interesting thing I think we can debate is whether the Mandalorian is in that kind of loco parentis role, or because there's another exception that is if you created the hazardous situation. So, you threw the person into the water and you don't go rescue them, or if you prevent others from rescuing. So say somebody's drowning and you say, oh no, I got it. Nobody else has to go in the water. I can rescue this person. If you then go in the water and say, no, I decided not to do it, then you're on the hook for preventing others from doing the rescuing. So I think we're in a kind of situation where the Mandalorian either is in loco parentis or has put the child in this hazardous situation, and now he's like, oh crap, this wasn't a great idea, I have to go rescue him.
Well done. Yeah, it's just, again, when you realize I gave the kid to Imperials, he has that crisis moment seeing the other Mandalorians who said like, you share a table with those who did this to us. I mean, like, all of that had to be like sinking in slowly of like, crap. What have I done?
And then he sees the bassinet in the trash can, and it's done. It's over.
I'm putting a bomb on this wall.
I'm destroying property. I'm getting that kid like come hell or high water. It's really the bassinet in the garbage dump that just abandoned and dirty and very sad that just throws him over the edge.
It's well, I think it was already committed, but yeah, it's like, nope, I'm gonna hurt all of you. So yeah. You guys are stormtroopers to begin with, probably war criminals. I'm fine with this. So, which then brings in the issue of defense of others, form of self-defense. A great analogy for that is Back to the Future. George punching Biff, saving Elaine from sexual assault, proper defense of others. Of, hey, you leave her alone. That's like a quintessential example of that. This is different because he's having his crisis moment of like, what have I done, to using his scope that's apparently infrared and can get audio, so he can hear what the exchange between the client and Dr. Pershing. That's all goes to, I think, to the totality of like realizing the kids in life-threatening danger and to go in guns blazing. I mean, I wouldn't have a problem defending him because I think morally it was the right thing to do. It might be pushing the defense of others doctrine in a really, really far situation that we don't see in real life. But that's why this is Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the idea of how do you categorize the Mandalorian's relationship with the child? Has he kind of shifted into a parental, responsibility for this kid's welfare role as opposed to just kind of a stranger or, you know, a third party, you know, does he have some sort of responsibility and duty to this child as in sort of that loco parentis way that he didn't before? And I think that's where you kind of shift into a stronger defense of others argument versus a less stronger defense of others argument.
It was, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It was on the Sky Talkers podcast where they mentioned somebody on Twitter referred to the Mandalorian as the Mandadadalorian. And it's like, I don't know whoever did that, but God bless you. That does highlight the situation that this show has become. And I'm completely fine with it. You know, it's, you know, if this was just about like mercenaries and hunting down, you know, bail jumpers, people would still tune in and watch it. But, you know, adding the save the kid from the bad guys element does give this the pure Star Wars feel of like, this is what happens in Star Wars.
Yeah.
We talked about before in a couple of the prior episodes, this notion that this type of contract is not normal and obviously probably wouldn't be legal given the subject matter and whatnot. I think that puts him going into this episode into a legal position where that duty to rescue is going to be tripped if the circumstances are right, because he's accepted a contract that's obviously outside the bounds of probably what the guild typically allows for, which is why there's nothing in writing. There's no nothing other than a tracking fob. They've got, it's basically off the books. And he is rapidly coming to suspect, leading up to the beginning of this episode, that something is nefarious that's going on here. I mean, you got a lot of folks who are just trying to kill, not just capture this child. And then he breaks kind of an important tenet of the bounty hunting code and asks about the nature of the job, or what their intent is with the child, and gets confronted about it. And I would argue at that moment, even though he's turning this kid over to folks that he knows are probably bad news, it's not tripped then. But certainly when he takes, Josh or Gabby, one of you mentioned his infrared scope, when he overhears that conversation about extraction, I think that's where his legal duty gets tripped, because there he's got the pretty plain evidence that something is going to happen to this kid that's putting him in danger. And fortunately for him, he takes the right action and jumps immediately in to do things. And when it comes to rescuing the child, once he's actually in the building, when the kid has an interrogation droid floating right above him with a needle or some sort of dastardly tool ready to go, and he destroys that. And I think he uses the right amount of restraint, because what does he do with Dr. Pershing? He shoves him to the side, probably because it's a plot device and we need him later to find out more. But he shoves him to the side. There's no need to kill Dr. Pershing, and so he shows some restraint in his force. And the other folks that get killed in that building are all stormtroopers that are trying to hurt him and hurt the child. So whether they knew this or not, they make it nice and clean.
Yeah, I would add with Dr. Pershing, which was also why the Mandalorian let him live, was the doctor was shielding the child with his own body, saying, "Get away from him. He's just a child." So willing to lay down his life for the kid was
and not a threat. Yeah,
and not a threat. So I like that can't be forgotten of. Maybe this guy isn't totally bad. Did he just make a bad life choice on who to work for? And it's it's in too deep now. Like maybe we'll find out.
Yeah.
But
and maybe the thing is too, I thought about this when we were talking about trafficking. Maybe Dr. Pershing himself is being, is a victim of labor trafficking, because he, at one point when the Mandalorian is listening to their conversation, the client tells him, "I can't guarantee your safety anymore." So he's clearly doing all this with, if not a literal gun to his head, with a very kind of, metaphorical gun to his head. And, he says, that he's there to protect the child. He didn't want to hurt him. So he seems very forced to do this. And, I think it's interesting, as you were saying, Thomas, a lot of the Mandalorian's actions throughout that entire raid of the Imperial complex, he uses equal force. He only uses the stormtroopers that are trying to kill the child get killed, and Dr. Pershing, who is trying to protect the child, only gets, shoved to the side to kind of get him out of the way. He doesn't get killed in return, which I think is right on par with a good defense of others defense.
And the Empire, that you make a really good point, because the Empire is no stranger, as we well know from Rogue One, to using forced labor in the form of scientists. And it's interesting. I don't know what his connection is yet to the Kaminoans, if there is one. Maybe he found this cool shirt, this uniform, and he's just wearing it because he likes shades of gray. But from what we've seen of the Kaminoan cloners, they're not mixing species. It's all sort of uniform at their cloning facilities. It's staffed by Kaminoans. The doctors are Kaminoans. The only exception to that would be during the Clone Wars, where you see Jedi Shaak Ti that manages the clone training program, and then some oddball bounty hunters that come in to help. So this is something new. If he's somehow officially connected to their cloning program, I think you probably have hit the nail right on the head, that he is maybe not quite fully voluntarily in this position. And in the first episode, when you see the client commission the Mandalorian, he argues back. He says, no, our understanding was that this package would be brought back alive, not dead. So unclear who he's answering to, but he may be trafficked. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Thomas, putting on your army hat and thinking of street to street fighting, raiding a building to recover somebody who's taken prisoner, like, what was your reaction to watching the Mandalorian just go in and light the whoop lamp of like shooting guys, like stabbing guys, guy who's down shoots him just to be sure,
flame throwing guys.
Yeah, I was just watching this like, damn, and I loved every second of it. And then the whistling birds, it's like, okay, so it's nice to know what that is. And good quick foreshadowing. Didn't have to wait long to see what they looked like. What was your thoughts from like the army experience perspective of the one-man raid killing at least 8 or 9 stormtroopers?
Mm-hmm. I mean, tactically, if he's going for pure stealth, pure covertness, I think he leaves a little bit to be desired. Flame throwing a guy and having him scream out as he gets burned to a crisp is not the most subtle way to go about it. But I think it's perfectly matched for this scene, because like, he's going in furious. He's angry, and it shows through. He's not thinking as clearly as he probably is on a standard bounty job. And that's what I love about this scene. It's just like visual poetry as he moves through, because you see sort of like this level of pissed offness in everything that he's doing. Even Dr. Pershing, he's just like this like little guy, clearly not trying to hurt the kid himself, and he just shoves him, like throws him into the corner. I thought it was perfectly matched to what his emotions were as he goes in there.
Yeah, gun pointed at him, like, what did you do?
Yeah. And the whistling birds, that was like, when he got those, I was like, oh man, I hope we don't have to wait like 2 episodes before he has a chance to use that. And Deborah Chow said, I got you, Thomas. You wait about 5 minutes and it's going to come up. And I went back. This is how ridiculous I am. I went back as I said, man, I hope those weren't all of his rounds. Like, I hope he's got some more left in the tank. And I think he does. I think he's got a few spare ones that he didn't fire off. So if you're out there, I hope let's see the rest of those get used.
And the forger might have made some more for him to reload. Like, so what's in the gauntlet might not be, the full magazine count. So
I like that and maybe this is a legal issue for separate, but he reserved a number of those whistling birds for the foundlings, presumably the little kid, the small Mandalorians. I think it's like the Mandalorian equivalent of lawn darts.
Well, if younglings got to use lightsabers, which again screams child hazard right out of the gate, is it that much of a stretch to give, foundlings whistling birds? I mean,
they seemed a little more controlled than a lightsaber, because they seem
That's
to
true.
go exactly where, like a boomerang, that they go where they're supposed to go. So they seem a little bit more controlled than a child with a lightsaber. So I definitely trust a kid with whistling birds more than I would a lightsaber.
yeah. So the raid's completed, and they're making their break for it, and all the tracking fobs go off for all the bounty hunters. To now, again, in my view, they're now acting as mercenaries to go out and kill the kid. So that's not bounty hunting, that's murder for hire. So there's that. Gabby, reaction to the fobs going off.
My God, when all the fob, because I already took issue when it was clear that more than one person had the fob, and I was like, how many people can track this child? Like, where is the whatever's controlling the fob? And then when you see the amount of fobs that had been passed out in this one little cantina, I was just, the privacy nerd in me just like went nuts, because I was like, really, like, what is, I wanted some, ACLU lawyer to just like bust in there and just be like, no, this isn't happening. We're not like allowing a child to be tracked with these little beeping devices. We don't know how they're being tracked. It's just, and what I think is interesting, and what we saw in this particular episode, because in the previous episodes we knew that the fob kind of tracked the individual's general location, right? Like it tracked the blue individual to the bar, it tracked the child to that compound, and kind of further into the compound. But I think what this really showed was that it can detect like down to there's no kind of radius, right, around where the fob is detecting. This thing is pinpoint accurate as to where the individual is. So I think that raises a heightened privacy concern, that it's not just giving the general location of the person, but that it's actually like pinpoint accuracy where this person is at all times, which is not cool.
To that point, there was speculation. I don't know if we brought it up, but I've seen a thought that this code sequence that was mentioned, this code string that the client and Mandalorian discussed in the first episode, is somehow a DNA tied to somebody's DNA sequence, and that or some really personally identifiable information. That's why he only has chain code is the phrase I'm looking for, that he only had the last few digits of the chain code, which related to his age. And I think, Gabby, you might have made this point in the first recording, that this could be akin to like a social security number or something that's just floating out there. Because clearly, I think if this was a physical device that was like a little tiny adorable ankle bracelet around the child, he would have removed it. I mean, he's a professional, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be something more than that, something that he can't get at easily.
Well, and I think what's interesting too, that we're kind of learning about it, is it's something that can be, the alert can be turned on and off, right? Because clearly this alert went off, went dead when the Mandalorian turned the bounty in, turned the child to the client. All the fobs went off. The fobs were activated again not once he took him from, the MRI machine type device, but once he stepped out of the compound, right? So it was like leaving the compound triggered the device. So, it'd be interesting to see who's controlling when it gets triggered, when it gets shut off, who controls that? How is it controlled? There's a lot of privacy issues.
Yeah, and I interpreted that differently with the fobs going off. my feeling was it was an off-screen account of Dr. Pershing talking to the client, and thus them getting reactivated. But that is an interesting idea. If it activated because the kid left the compound, that's I don't know what the right answer is, but yeah, I interpreted that very differently.
Yeah, and it would not be beyond the realm of plausibility because if you think most of his clients, most of his targets, bounties, are bail jumpers, presumably they're folks that were at least processed initially through the criminal justice system in the galaxy. They probably gave a DNA sample as part of that. So theoretically, there's an available full chain code for the authorities to use, or bounty hunters for that matter. Possibly this child had that process done sort of extrajudicially, if I can speak right, and then the client or whoever hacked isn't the right word for Star Wars. I guess it would be sliced and was able to get just a partial sequence number out of this chain code, and that's how they're tracking this kid. So there's a lot to unwind here.
Yeah, good points, and I don't know if we'll get answers. But it does bring us to, the exceptionally well done street fight. That is it Western? Is it like what we could have seen, during the war in Iraq? Like the street to street fight of, one man taking on, a small army to protect a kid. Which again, I didn't realize it was everything I wanted in Star Wars. It's again, just so much there. But I do think this is different than the raid, because the raid was to go save the kid, and now he's being confronted by bounty hunters who look like they're ready to shoot to kill, which raises self-defense. And either of you, whoever wants to jump in first, but I think the bounty hunter is completely, the Mandalorian is acting in complete self-defense in the scene to, protect himself and the child from the other bounty hunters who are there in a murder for hire capacity.
Yeah, Grief makes it completely clear, and I should say from the outset, if this wasn't the purest version of a Star Wars Wild West shootout, I mean, you've got shooters up on top of the buildings, like in every Western ever. You've got folks in little alleyways. You've got a wagon in that in that speeder. I mean, it's all there, right? So Grief makes it explicitly clear what's going to happen to him if he doesn't knuckle under and give him exactly what he wants, because he tells the Mandalorian, Mandalorian says, I'm going to go to my ship and leave with the child, and you guys aren't going to do anything. And Grief's response is, how about you get out of the way? Otherwise, we're going to strip you for parts. Which is not the I guess, least thinly veiled death threat, but pretty damn close, I guess. And so just because the Mandalorian fires the first shot doesn't mean that he's out of his ability to use or rely on self-defense here.
Yeah, I would say he's not the aggressor in this scene. Thus, self-defense applies, because they've all showed up in force to kill him. Like this is the Mos Eisley Cantina, Han versus Guido, turned up to 25, and it's a radically intense situation of they're there to kill him, and he's surrounded, and it's like, again, it's just so well done. There are some issues when it comes to self-defense law, and I pulled some California case holdings that self-defense may not be invoked by someone through their own wrongful conduct has created circumstances under which his adversary attacks or pursuits is legally justified. And my view is saving the child from the Imperials, that was justified conduct to save the kid's life. The bounty hunters are acting in a murder for hire capacity to kill him in order to get the kid, if not kill the kid themselves. That's murder for hire. So like there's no justification for that. So the Mandalorian didn't create the situation because they were hired to kill. So I think, again, I do think all of his actions with all the bounty hunters, he either disintegrates or shoots or burns. He might have stabbed one. I lost count.
He came close to batting for the cycle. I don't know. Killing for the cycle, I guess it would be.
Yeah, it's it's like so well done, and then the cavalry shows up again, adding to the Western theme. But before the cavalry gets there, there's an issue with carjacking, and the issue of, can you carjack an autonomous vehicle? Because he jumps in the speeder, the wagon, and points his blaster at the R2 unit and says, "Drive," and the droid clearly squeaks that he's like not happy with the situation, but drives so he doesn't get blasted. Can you carjack an autonomous vehicle? And Gabby, do you want to take the wheel on this one?
Ha ha ha. No pun intended. So it becomes whether, if it's a carjacking, do we consider the droid to be the possessor of the vehicle? And is this like, in typical Western fashion, is this like the dude on the cart, on his horse with a cart attached, and, the cowboy jumps in and says, drive? Or is this more like the speeder that we saw in episode 1, where the speeder and the droid were one and the same, and so this is more of an autonomous vehicle that's kind of just operating on its own, that may not necessarily have a possessor. So I think it would be it would be a matter of whether the droid is considered the possessor of the vehicle, whether it rises to a criminal liability situation, or whether this is just kind of a trespass to chattels type of tort, because he doesn't take it for long, and he wasn't going to take it for long regardless of whether it got shot or not. He was just going to take it to get out, to get to his vehicle. He wasn't going to take it because part of carjacking is to permanently deprive, and to wrongfully take something away, to permanently deprive the owner. And I think he doesn't intend to do that at all. He just wants to get out. It's kind of necessity. That's his only way out. So I think it comes down to how you consider the droid in this situation.
Excellent. Well, that leads right to the issue of the trolley problem with droids. For those who aren't familiar with this concept, issue and tort, and again, it's imagine a trolley, like a cable car, San Francisco, and it's, careening down the hill because the brake went out. And the only way to, stop the speeding trolley is, you either throw a passenger out to, act as the brake, so the passenger's killed, but the trolley stopped. Or, you pull a gun and shoot a pedestrian who's crossing the street to use their body as a brake. And in our situation, we have, Griff, the great Carl Weathers, and God, I'm so happy to hear his voice and see him because he's always Apollo to me. And he shoots the droid who is a full R2 unit. So, he's a full R2 unit at the front of the vehicle. So he's different than, the built-in droid that we saw in the first episode. But he shoots the droid in order to stop the speeder, and the little guy screams when he gets shot. Let's break that down. Thomas, do you want to go first with this?
I think it's based on the way Grief was talking. It sounds like either this is his speeder or wagon, whatever we're going to call it now, or he's hired this. So perhaps he's situated a little bit differently if it's his droid that he's shooting at. I don't know that it was absolutely necessary. Could they have regrouped and without destroying the speeder and shooting this poor droid in the dome, just gone over it? They know where he's going. I mean, they just need to get over there. And that speeder was not exactly moving at the speed of light. I mean, that may have been the slowest speeder in Star Wars that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know that it was strictly necessary to cook that poor droid. But I wonder whether Grief was maybe differently situated than the average person on a trolley. I will say, by the way, the trolley problem is a purely California problem. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I studied in North Carolina, the problem of runaway trolleys was non-existent.
It's not an East Coast thing at all. Like this is all you, California.
This
all
is your
you.
weird California outer rim law, Josh.
It's the fact you guys live in flat states where you don't have trolleys. Well, fine.
It'd be like I guess the closest we would have would be like the farm combine problem. If you're threshing your corn and the brakes on the combine go out, can you shoot the cow to stop the thing? I don't know.
Yeah, well, we don't have hush puppies here, so you just own that. Well, let's move away from the necessity of defense to the issue of the Mandalorians. And Gabby, why don't you take point on this, because you did a lot of research on, is the Mandalorian covert? They get refugee status.
Yeah. So I think they do. I would say they would get refugee status. We would have to determine what their fear of persecution is. Is they kind of have this ambiguous fear of persecution. They talk about how their survival is their secrecy, and them staying kind of under the radar. And obviously now their cover's blown because they've all flown to go save the Mandalorian. So what is this fear that they have is the question. Of obviously that's when you're seeking refugee status or seeking asylum, that's the big hurdle to overcome, is imminent fear of persecution. So, and the other question would be, where would they seek refugee status? Because they're a covert. It's not necessarily all of the Mandalorians. So it's not talking about a huge displaced population like the Rohingya, which are now stateless individuals through no fault of their own. It's not a whole people. It's just a group of this particular ethno-linguistic cultural group. So where would they seek refugee status? How would they prove their imminent fear of persecution? And where would they go? Or are they just kind of a break off of, is the fear specific to them? Is it specific to all Mandalorians? That's kind of the issue there.
Yeah, we don't know. We haven't seen enough of backstory on the Purge, as it were, to know who perpetrated it and to what extent it fractured the Mandalorian society. Clearly, the context that's been laid out so far is that this really destroyed, what we previously knew of Mandalore from the Clone Wars. Certainly they had a very robust population, if not one that was a bit internally fractured over disagreements in sort of how their future was going to look. But based on the argument that this disagreement that happens between the heavy Mandalorian or the heavy infantry Mandalorian, I don't think he's been given a name yet.
Yeah, he's a Vizsla.
A Vizsla? Oh.
Yeah. So Jon Favreau voiced him, and they announced there's a Black Series action figure coming out very soon. So yeah. So and the figure looks freaking beautiful. So I don't know if it's a child of Pre-Vizsla, but it's a Vizsla.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is a big clan, and so yeah. I mean, presumably it's the Imperials that I mean, that's makes the most sense, right? That the Imperials perpetrated the Great Purge.
Yeah.
But to Gabby's point, what's their fear, right? The Empire is gone. They've been gone for some time now. Why can they only go above ground one at a time? Who's still persecuting them? Is there still a bounty on Mandalorians? I mean, if are folks able to profit if they bring in a true-blooded Mandalorian, dead or alive, to some authority? What's feeding this fear? Because what's really fascinating to me is that this is a race full of badasses, right? This is not some, very persecuted race that's weak and has been cast out in the galaxy. I mean, these folks are warriors at their core. You see that in this episode. It's got to be something pretty darn significant for them to be underground like sand rats, as they're described.
Yeah, and I think also, as many immigration lawyers will tell you, especially with regards to the U.S. system of seeking asylum, you have to overcome such a high bar with that proving the imminent fear of persecution, because you can't just say, oh, the conditions in my home country are bad, oh, there's violence, oh, there's this, oh, there's X. You have to specifically demonstrate, which is why it's such a huge hurdle to overcome, is you have to demonstrate that your particular life is in danger, that you personally face persecution and will die if you are returned to your home country. So that's why it would be interesting to see because right now we just know that they fear persecution, right? We just know that they live underground like rats. They, are now forced to move because they came out of hiding. But we don't know what that specific thing is that's targeting all of them, that's putting all of their lives in danger. So, that's how they would have to demonstrate in order to get that refugee status. They don't have it just by virtue of being displaced, unfortunately.
This raises so many issues, because when we looking at Rebels and the way that Star Wars Rebels ended, Sabine Wren was on Lothal, waiting until Ahsoka showed up, and they went off to go find Ezra. And there was no hint that Mandalore had been ravaged in any way. But prior, in Rebels, there was the entire liberation with, Clan Wren, and other clans uniting, Sabine using the dark saber to help unify folks, and ultimately, after the rescue of her father, Duchess Satine's sister, Bogue, was it Katin's, was it Kriz? Katie Sarakov voiced the character, has the dark saber, and theoretically would have been in charge. What happened after that? To Return of the Jedi. Was there? Did the Mandalore itself get hit hard, firebombed, type situation, or nuclear weapons? What, or was it something else that was economic in nature that shattered the society? Because they were moons and other planets within the system that had a robust Mandalorian clans at strength. So what happened there?
The other thing that could have happened, because as I was kind of doing research into this, into the Mandalorian history, there's obviously sects of Mandalorians, and they have a cultural linguistic commonality, but the way it's being portrayed in the Mandalorian is this almost religious type bond that they say this is the way, and that there's all of this kind of religious tonality to their bond. So it's possible to imagine that maybe their a religious sect within the Mandalorians that has been persecuted, and that is now why they must flee, because their particular religious ideology of the Mandalorian way of life is being threatened by maybe other Mandalorians or other individuals, that would be more specific to them. And obviously we've seen, religious persecution in many forms. So that would be, rather straightforward for them to kind of portray.
They're like Orthodox Mandalorians, I guess. Because we've seen the Death Watch. I think it's a really interesting point, because the Mandalore that we see in the Clone Wars is split between these traditionalists, this sect of the Death Watch that, begins less as terrorists and just as folks that see themselves as like the pure incantation of Mandalorians, and they look upon the quote-unquote new Mandalorians, the peace-loving folks who are trying to move away from this warrior past, as sort of a bastardization of what Mandalore has always stood for. So I think that's an absolute possibility, that we're not seeing maybe Mandalorians writ large, but maybe this a sect of folks.
Yeah, good questions. We did get a little bit more with the flashback to the Clone Wars, where the Mandalorian was a child, and we do see his parents toss him into a cellar that looked more like a bunker, because there was at least a cushioned couch for him to sit in. And the last shot of the flashback was the hatch opening up and a super battle droid standing over him. And again, the editing cut of the armor being smelted and forged was a nice way to shatter what happened. But I think in a future, clearly in a future episode, we'll see how that child survived the super battle droid. But my gut, this is pure speculation. It's dangerous for fans to do this because something else can happen instead. The easy answer is some Mandalorians save him. That's the easy answer of, he's saved by Mandalorians who, blow up the super battle droids. That would make sense. Something else that would be the ultimate tease for Favreau and Filoni to do, and especially if they do this in the next episode that Filoni directs, is if this is the first time we see a live action Ahsoka, slice and dice a super battle droid, and just have it be real quick.
She was there. If that's a depiction of the Siege of Mandalore, she was there. So it's entirely possible. I think Star Wars Twitter would implode, and it'd be like the second Big Bang. And then explode all at once in an instant.
If people lost their minds with Baby Yoda, imagine a live action Ahsoka.
Even just a glimpse.
A glimpse. It doesn't have to be much. It just has to be the quick glimpse of her slicing that droid down, and there would be much rejoicing, and that might be the only way that they could top the Baby Yoda reveal.
Yeah, but I think to your point, Josh, I think they're definitely going to be rescued or adopted, this flashback orphan, if you will, if he is the Mandalorian, because, Star Wars can definitely take this in a different direction, and it turns out it's not the Mandalorian. Maybe this was the child he couldn't save, right? And then the Baby Yoda is now his kind of redeeming, his second chance, if you will. But it would fit with the Mandalorian history. One thing I found that was interesting is that they're very unconcerned with biological lineage, because they're a war mongering culture, and they're constantly in battle. There's a lot of widows and orphans, and so the idea of adopting individuals is not uncommon, is actually extremely common in the Mandalorian culture, in the extended universe. And it was not, according to Wikipedia, it was not uncommon for soldiers to take war orphans as sons or daughters. And in fact, the adoption ritual for Mandalorians was really simple. All they had to do was say to the intended child, I know your name as my child. And that was all it took to make an individual a Mandalorian. So I think we'll see that whatever that child in the flashback happens to be, whether that's the child that couldn't be saved or whether that's the Mandalorian himself, clearly these adopted individuals become foundlings, because the foundlings are clearly important to the Mandalorian and are clearly important to this particular covert. But I think you're going to see some sort of, parallel adoption taking place, both with Baby Yoda and whatever's happening in these flashbacks.
Well, it's in the name, foundling.
Yeah.
Found. So it's, I was a foundling. Okay, so Mandalorians found him. Now, granted, he could have been a citizen on Mandalore, or that after, from the peace hippie part of the culture that are wiped out during the siege of Mandalore, and it's somebody from Death Watch or another similar sect that adopts him. And that seems completely reasonable. I know we'll find out within 5 episodes of what the answer is. But yeah, that makes sense on what the foundlings are, because they're found. They're not necessarily born into the clan. They're war orphans that are adopted, which does raise interesting cultural questions with this combat-focused, like, religious view that has high compassion for war orphans and adopts children. That does give them depth. And it's the beautiful thing about having a weekly series that you can explore versus a 2-hour movie where everything has to be tight and wrapped up in 2 hours. So it's, again, perk of a TV series.
I will say that for this next episode, coming right after Thanksgiving, I personally will be ingesting as much turkey as possible and therefore as much tryptophan as possible, so I can pass out immediately, wake up after midnight, rested, having fallen asleep probably at 2 p.m., and then promptly watch The Mandalorian again.
It's like, you did nothing wrong.
It's all just coming together. It's one beautiful plan.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
The other news is, there will be Baby Yoda merchandise coming out soon.
Yes.
And apparently in time for Christmas. So
Disney has an inside look to my wallet. They know exactly how it operates. They know exactly how to get the money out of my wallet. Like, just little, Disney-fied wings on my cash.
I'm sure when they were like scoping out the show and release date and going like, okay, we can't release the toys out of the gate for Baby Yoda because it's a spoiler and we're going to do what the showrunner says. But on the flip side, we're going to have all the plans ready. So therefore there's like nothing we can turnkey and start production and sell these babies and make $1 billion in Baby Yoda.
It's impressive, because rarely, I can't think of a time where a product reveal hasn't been sort of on the cutting edge of spoilers, right? Whether it's a Lego set revealing a character or something like that. I mean, it just happens. It's really hard because of the internet to clamp all that stuff down. But damn, they must have had something strong to keep word tight, or the lips tight on this one.
Well, I think it was like, I think of the Baby Groot kind of reveal the same way. I mean, you didn't know that Groot was going to die and then Baby Groot was going to pop up in the post credits. So, but they had that merchandise like right at, like as soon as, it was politically okay to start sharing, the baby Groot dance gifts. Like, they were selling merchandise for that.
Yeah.
So I think they had that kind of tested and true. And, if we get a baby Groot and baby Yoda spinoff for little kids, I will watch it.
That's an amazing idea.
Yeah, I could just see that meaning of like, design the toy on paper. Nothing will be digital. And if you use a computer, it can't be connected to the internet. So you get this Commodore 64, make it happen. And
You got to print all this on dot matrix paper.
we're going to design the toy old school. And because if it's analog, it can't be hacked.
Yep.
And some guy in a Disney bunker making it. It's ready.
It's perfect.
Behold. But yeah, it's like no, I got a Razor Crest, Hot Wheels, $4.99 at Target, and it sits on the desk now, and I love it.
Keep your Jawa toys away from it. I hear
Yeah.
those two things might not mix.
Well,
And
oh, go ahead.
no, this is one of the few times I might take. I got a Mandalorian and Jawa Black series. I think I'll take them out of the boxes because I have the stands and put them in my shelf, and just hold on to the boxes because they're that beautiful. And like, they didn't release a Mandalorian figure with the new Beskar armor, so like that will come out later. So they've done a really good job of not spoiling things.
Yeah. What I think is interesting, though, is that we obviously did not get the Baby Yoda reveal till the end of Chapter 1 release, but they've clearly released a lot of merchandise and also promo images for Cara Dune,
Mhm.
which is interesting that they've kind of, and obviously IG-11, but he was, down and out in the first episode. But it's interesting that, we're already at episode 3 and we haven't seen her character yet, which this is her lovely Funko Pop. I will note that she has a Rebel icon tattoo on her cheek. So that's very interesting to see how that
She was
goes
a former Rebel shock trooper,
Mhm.
Spec Forces trooper. So those ties run deep, I suppose.
Well,
Yep.
and her Black Series figure comes out later. So
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure when. I hope for Christmas because they're ideal gifts. And
Do you think, now this is going to be the best kind of speculation, but do you think that the Mandalorian will play matchmaker and set his friend Mr. Vizsla up with Cara Dune? Because they seem like, we haven't seen Cara Dune in action, but they seem like they'd be a good match.
Favreau.
You totally expected this episode to go that direction, I'm sure.
And in the Marvel movies, Jon Favreau's happy does go out with Aunt May, so anything's that would throw him one hell of a bone. It's like, so your characters will get the girl for a change. Are you good with that?
They can bond over big guns, big blasters.
You're writing the series, so if you write that in, that does seem kind of self-serving there, John. But yeah, I don't know. I don't care. She's been delightful in interviews, and I can't wait to see her character on screen.
And fun fact about Vizsla, he's actually played, he's voiced by Favreau, but he's actually played by the same dude who played the bar thug, the very big bar thug who scrapes the Mandalorian's armor.
Oh,
plays
yeah.
our Vizsla character. So very interesting change of roles there.
It's also nice for the actor to go like, so you're going to get more than a 4-minute scene.
You're going to get killed real quickly here, but we've got something else for you.
And you get to play a good guy. So deal? So
with a jetpack.
Yeah, there you go. That's the important feature.
And that also, that also fits with Star Wars history. If you watch Estelle 77, I believe it's still on Netflix, that has all of the extras, and they had different people like play stormtroopers who also were unmasked, playing different characters in different scenes. And I think it was the guy who played like one of Luke's buddies, who ended up getting cut from the film, is the stormtrooper who, talks to Kenobi with like, just move along. So, his cut scene, wasn't, was a bigger scene, but he ended up with something iconic instead. So highly recommend that. And again, that it fits Star Wars tradition. So with that, everyone, we will stay tuned for written blog posts, but because again, this is, we have a lot to be thankful for, and we will have an episode after Thanksgiving, but everyone have a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Thomas and Gabby, I know we'll be talking more, and everyone, stay geeky, America.